Hey everybody, welcome to the Level Up Leadership Podcast. My name is Mike Delgado.
My name is Patty Guevara.
This podcast is designed to help gain insight into the leadership skills and traits needed to grow our careers.
In this podcast, we'll talk mentorship, career navigation, handling rejection, work-life balance, mental health, diversity and inclusion, and so much more.
We hope you enjoy the show.
Today, we're speaking with Andy Meikle, founder of Elkiem, an organization focused on teaching leaders ways to create high-performance cultures. For over 20 years, he has researched and interviewed thousands of high achievers all around the world, including top athletes, academics, scientists, and leaders at Google, Tesla, NASA, the United Nations, Harvard Business School, Juilliard, and more.
So this is actually a very special edition of Level Up because we're on location. We're actually outside the four walls of Experian here with Andy Meikle. And Andy, you just did an 8-hour class and now you're like, yep, let's do an hour podcast. What keeps your energy up?
It's practice for me. I've been doing it a long time. So, it's like anything, I think there's a certain fitness in what you do. And I know when I was young, I would do a day and you'd feel wrecked at the end of the day. You'd feel like sleeping. But today, it's just a normal day. I'll finish this and we'll go do some exercise. I do what everyone else does. I watch my diet and I watch my what I put into my system, food-wise and etc. But I think it is really a fitness for job in the sense that what you do a lot of, you tend to get a lot of energy for. I've noticed. Anyway. Speak fitness, if there is such a thing.
Well, it's interesting reading your bio that you actually got your start as an athlete. I was wondering if you can kind of take us back to your early days.
It was a sport in Australia called Ironman. Now, that's different to the Ironman that you see in triathlon. So Ironman in Australia is an ocean sport, primarily upper body. So swim, ocean kayak, Malibu board and run. So races are still pretty long. They're somewhere between 2 and 5 hours. It's a big deal in Australia. So our races were broadcast on television on a Sunday afternoon. And so it was, and the most famous people in the country at those stage were the most famous Ironmen in the country because it's very uniquely Australian on the beach, doing your thing. And so a lot of young kids are attracted into that sport, like any national sport. And I just wanted to be the guy that would win that race. And but I wasn't winning, very clearly. I started off, I went very quickly to about 8th in the sport.
That's amazing, though.
Yeah, well, now I look back and I go, that's pretty cool. At the time, I was very dissatisfied.
Really?
Because I just wanted to win. And I got stuck at 8th. And I think that was formulative. For me, it was what the hell is going wrong with me? That means that I can't win. And I wasn't even, there's a group that were winning first, second, and third. There was another group that was sort of third, fourth, and fifth. I wasn't even in that first 2 packs. It was so frustrating. And that was formulative because that's what started all this research. I was just trying to work out, well, why am I not winning? What has happened here? And it's hard to give you the sense of, I was dissatisfied in my cells, I was finding it difficult to sleep. And that curiosity for trying to understand high performance probably came from there.
Have you always been really hard on yourself?
Yeah, I'm hard on myself when I make a mistake. I don't like making errors. I will ponder on. I've been known to ponder on errors that I make all night.
Yeah.
But I realise you have to make them, but I don't like them when I do. And so I'm hard on myself, but I'm not hard on myself if I think I'm doing okay. I feel a reasonable judge of my own performance. Not perfect, and I do ask and I get a heap of feedback. I get a lot of people measuring me and a lot of people actually coming up and giving you feedback one way or another. And I've got a close set of people around me that I often invite into sessions and invite into my research or whatever to give me feedback. But I feel a reasonable judge. So I'm not hard on myself if I think I'm doing okay. I'm not like that. But if I think I've made a stupid error, kick the hell out of myself.
How do you know who to listen to? Because tons of people give you feedback, and there's lots of people who are critical, right? So I'm kind of curious, like, what do you choose to pay attention to?
I think you get a feel for the people who, well, first of all, line of sight, like a person who's seen enough to be able to make an evaluation. I think, if people can't see you, how can they give you feedback? Or if they've only seen you for a few moments, how can they give you feedback? I think there are sort of negative people. And I'm happy to listen to it, but I just go, hey, just one of those things.
Yeah.
Bugger off. But then there is a group of people who know my craft. And for instance, I had one of the top stage actors from the UK come out to Australia, or is spending time in Australia, and I had him come in and critique.
Oh, wow.
What I do, because ultimately I'm a communicator,
right?
But you've got to keep groups on, or there's a research part of my world which is a much more comfortable part of my job than the presenting part of it, because you're not so exposed. But so I tend to get experts giving me feedback, and I tend to have people who know what I want. So I've got Paul from my business who knows my business really well, and I'll often be asking him, how does this feel? So people who are in close quarters.
I love that you are, like, as you're working on improving your teaching, your public communication, that you're bringing in these experts, like a well-renowned actor. I mean, that's actually hard to, like, have somebody who's, like, so polished, like, please sit down and watch me, and then have to hear the feedback. And
it did feel at the time, it wasn't comfortable too, because the last thing you want to be when you're communicating is consciousness. Like, consciousness is no fun.
Yeah.
Because I think he said, I don't like the way you're standing up there. And I'm like, now I have to be worried about, it's hard enough to remember what I have to say rather than thinking about the way I stand.
Right.
And so, it is uncomfortable. And for a period after you get the feedback, because I had him just nut down what are the two big improvement points I need to make. While you're then conscious of those two improvement points in the days and weeks that come, it does make the activity a bit uncomfortable for a while. And therefore, I think you don't want too much of that in your head, because it can actually affect your ability to get your job done. So, but it does feel uncomfortable. It does feel uncomfortable because someone is about to tell you why you're shit, and they're not going to go, just you're good at this. Well, they'll try and say that, but it's all tactical to try and make sure you don't feel like it's all criticism.
Are there other, like, big areas like that where you're bringing in experts to, like, watch me here, help me improve?
Well, look, there's only two parts to my world. Like, I've got a very simple job in a sense, in that I'm either researching about high performance or communicating it. That's it. That's all I do. And I just travel between those places. Now, I have a business, but I have other people run my business. So really, for me, they're my two major improvement points, researching. Now, I have other people watch from the business. I have other people watch my interviews. So we videotape everything. Like, if you want to, you can take this and get assessed as an interviewee. You're an interviewer, I should say. So that all that can be assessed later. So I don't feel that need too much to be assessed as a researcher. So most of my improvement is going to be in that second part of my role. So hence, get the experts in on that.
I would love to dig in the research part, because this gets into going back to your days as an athlete. You felt like, man, I'm only getting 8th place, which to me, I'm like, that's amazing. But to you, that wasn't good enough. And you're like, what is it? Why am I not getting better? And so can you kind of take us through, like, at what point did you begin, like, I want to start studying high performance? What is it that I'm missing?
Look, I had a bit of evidence that something about me wasn't quite right. I think physically I was okay. I probably may not have been physically the best specimen to win. Sometimes you look at basketballers and you can say, well, that person's probably going to be better than that person just based on physical status, physical structure. So I probably may not have been the best shaped athlete in terms of my physics, but I knew my mind wasn't right. And I knew that because we were all hanging out together prior to races starting, and you could see everyone else's faces in the approach to the races, and I felt a lot more scared than they looked. So I just knew it. I thought there's something. I get too nervous before races, and people would say, "Well, it's normal to be nervous before races."
Right.
But I'm like, I'm not feeling nerves. This thing, it's like I'm running away from a tiger. I felt afraid. So I had that evidence on my head. I just couldn't get my head around how to feel calm going into racing. TV cameras and
right.
I just couldn't get my head around it. So I had that evidence, and that's why I thought maybe my insight is psychological. So I started interviewing people. I just started saying, well, how do you handle this? And it wasn't, probably a very loose term at the start. I started chatting with other athletes, but structured chats, writing notes. And at some point I started to realise that interviewing was something that was much more important to me than the racing. And I realise now at nearly 50 that that's absolutely the case. This is, the research is, a lifeblood for me. It's like breathing. It's a big part of the enjoyment of my life.
How was that transition for you, going from a working athlete to being an interviewer and being a researcher and starting your own business?
Really easy. Some transitions I know for athletes are difficult. Some transitions between careers are difficult. But in the end, it became a real pain to have to go racing because it was interrupting my interviewing.
Yeah.
And because and probably there's a bit of force because I wasn't getting the result I wanted either. I was still finishing around 8th. And then I wasn't doing because I was travelling, interviewing, whatever. I was doing this sort of training that I probably needed to. I think in my last 1 or 2 races, I was sort of more into the teens where I finished, and that didn't feel good. Racing not at your best. So I think there was a little bit of exiting out of the old, which was a force. And I was being drawn towards the new as a force. So that transition was super easy.
Kind of like a no-brainer.
Yeah, no-brainer at all. There's not any doubt. What would have been hard if someone had said, well, you have to race for another 2 years? And I would have been like, oh, damn.
I know.
How do I get my head around that? So, the transition was easy. But it took a while to, like any, I was okay at Ironman, and that had a skill set to it, but there was nothing about that skill that was transferable.
Right.
So I had to learn a whole new set of skills, and that clearly is did take some time.
Are there some skills that your work as an athlete translated over?
Just discipline, preparation, all the basic stuff. Like this, my job is a job where you need to be prepared, and so whether it be communicating over the course of a day or whether it be interviewing, you need to go in. I try not to over-prepare for interviews because I find that you get some of your best stuff by letting the conversation go where it goes. You probably find the same thing. But I do find that being under-prepared in the communicating part of my job, the presenting part of my job, is a real danger. And so I over-prepare for it. I know exactly what I'm going to do and when and why. And I realised that if I have to use notes, I'm underprepared.
As you started to interview people and you started to, formulate types of questions that were important to you, that you were really drilling down on, what did you begin focusing on originally when it came to the athletes? Like, what were the big questions that you had that you were curious about? What makes them different than me?
Yeah, well, there were just big questions about the weaknesses that I had going into racing. So why, I was trying to drill and try and work out, why is this person not afraid of a negative result? How do they go in and they take these risks? Because I could never take that risk because what if it didn't work out well? Why'd they take off on that big wave? Because they could have, but they didn't. They defined the race, but I wouldn't have taken off on that wave because that could have meant that I would have finished 25th rather than 8th. So I was just trying to work out how to get my head around this fear that I was taking into races about losing. I didn't want to lose. So really, if I sort of cast my mind back, which sometimes it's a little easier to do than it was at the time, my psychology was I was more about not losing than I was winning. And that doesn't help you win. It helps you not lose. And so that's why I got stuck around that 8th, because that's not losing. It's not winning. It's sort of being in the middle somewhere.
Right. It's kind of just keeping your head above the water.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what it is. And if you looked at my training schedules, there wasn't a lot of experimentation taking place in the training. Everything's sort of locked in because I wasn't willing to go backwards. And I think the problem with not being willing to go backwards is sometimes you have to risk going backwards to go forwards. And I just couldn't get my head around it. So my questions were drilling into the issues that I wanted to solve in terms of my own personal psychology. But then more broadly into, the beliefs, what are the beliefs that these people have? I sort of believe, I learned early that I needed to develop a belief profile of every interview that I took.
Oh, and what is that?
It's what would this person have to believe to be achieving these results? And because if you haven't got a belief, maybe one of the ways of thinking about a person's psychology is that the beliefs are at the centre of their psychology. So that's a good place to start when trying to understand an individual. And I knew also intuitively at the time that the pursuit of the interview was to find the uniqueness of the individual. I think a lot of people approach the study of high performance to try and work out what are the common threads. And I don't think that's the right question. The right question in an interview is to say, well, if this person's producing a unique result, what is unique about them in terms of their psychology? I can't go and study their cells or their physiology, or I'm a studier of their method or their psychology. And so I was trying to work out as best as I could as a young person, how are they different in that regard?
Did you, during this process, look at academia, research that's out there about psychology? Was that useful to you?
No, I still today don't read anyone else's stuff. Sometimes listen to a podcast or whatever, but I tend to listen to podcasts that are unrelated to my field. I don't know. Sometimes I thought maybe that's a weakness. I'm just not interested. I believe if you're going to come up with a new way of looking at something, you probably don't want to listen to a whole heap of other stuff on it. It just conditions you in the same way they think. One of the great advantages, I think, that I unconsciously received, I've sort of more recently had academic accolades or whatever from my association with different universities, but in the early days, I wasn't educated. And I went out studying, just trying to work out what is... why is this person successful? Because I wanted to learn for me. And that, without that academic training, gave me I now know, gave me a very different way of looking at the world. And so I haven't really spent a lot of time studying other people's stuff other than to go interview them.
Yeah. Well, I think it served you well. You came in with a unique, you didn't have any sort of, this is the way you research, this is the way that you look at psychology. You came in kind of fresh. What can I learn about this person?
Yeah, and maybe that's probably clearly got some downsides as well. But it's what I've decided to do, and I do learn from others. Right, you can tell from all the research interviews that it's not an absence of desire for collaboration. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to approach the problem in the same way that everyone else has. It's very hard. Well, I learned very early from research from people who are innovative that it's very hard to break from what someone else has taught you already.
I'm really curious now about as you go in to meet different people and you're doing a lot of prep work, you're doing a lot of research, you have certain types of questions you want to ask. But then you said about their belief. Do you really want to kind of understand kind of their belief system? Can you kind of draw that out a little bit for us? Yeah,
there's a question that I think is probably your most simple profiling question, which is what would they have to believe to do that? So if we look at a group of people who are acting in a certain way, we could say, what would they have to believe for them to be acting in that way? And so we can work by looking at this bunch of behaviour back to the beliefs that they must have to be doing it. What would they have to believe to be stealing from that shop? So we can work from a behaviour back to a belief. And so what I've wanted to do is to then interact and have an interview with the person and say, what would they have to believe to be saying that? What do I have to believe to be saying what I'm saying right now? What do I have to believe in to even be conducting this conversation? And so I think what I've wanted to do is to then be able to describe what that person believes by re-asking that question over and over again. It's an inaccurate science, but it's not a bad way of trying to understand a person's psychology. What would they have to believe to leave at this time of day? What would they have to believe to be exercising after this day? What would they have? It gives you a sense as to what they believe. And so you can build a belief set, and that gives you then comparison point between individuals. They got that profile, they got that profile.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard anything like that.
Yeah. Can you give like an example of maybe like a high performer in athletics and something maybe they believe about themselves? Somebody who's like getting in the top 5 of an Ironman?
Well, for instance, I'll sort of go to a sort of a different sporting context for you. Tommy Caldwell, there's a guy that recently climbed the Dawn Wall in Yosemite in rock climbing. Wasn't the guy that free soloed.
Okay.
Alex Hamill, but there's the Dawn Wall is a big, wide, 2,000 foot, basically
It's amazing.
sheer face.
It's amazing.
And Tommy Caldwell was the first to climb the harder side. So you free solo the easy side, although without ropes.
What we call it easy.
Easy side. Easy side. If you had unlimited time, it's the easy side. But this it took him many days to get up. They effectively camped on the side of the rock face, and every sort of pitch that they had to climb has a very high degree of difficulty. So they had multiple attempts, but obviously they have ropes, because if you make a mistake from that without any ropes on that, you're going to get one attempt. Anyway, so it's a 10-year project. What would he have to
10-year project.
10-year project. What would he have to believe to be willing to take a goal that was 10 years? What do you have to believe? And to live on the side of a rock face, to conduct that for 13, what do you have to believe to be willing to do that? I had to go up there and map every single one of those little rock, there's those pitches, which might be, might take 2 or 3 hours. You had to map each one. So each one has and that. And where I'm left, after you ask that question over, Tommy's psychology is much more like a scientist than a sports person. The level of detail that he has to go to, he knows where his hand needs to be put, where each foot needs to be put in each one of those pitches. He has to believe in attention to detail. He has to believe in little things matter. So you can start to understand what is the mind of a great rock climber. And you're not trying to overcomplicate it either. You're trying to keep it nice and simple. And so that's the way you go about. So you'll find simple things like you'll believe I can win.
Yeah.
Wow, that's breathtakingly insightful shit. But we're trying to get at what are the beliefs that are driving behavior and what's the behavior that's driving the result.
Yeah. That is fascinating. And just your level of wanting to understand that detail and researching that. So as you began to do this, I'm kind of curious about like reactions from your friends, colleagues, partners that were like, what are you doing, Andy? You're researching high performance, like, because you're going all in. You're wanting to understand all these different details, behaviors. I'm kind of curious about, as you were starting out, reactions you got from others.
I didn't spend a lot of time publicising it. For a start, it's quite a solitary pursuit, particularly initially, and so there wasn't a hell of a lot of me going, I've just put out the high performance research banner. Here's my business card. But my close friends, I think there was always, I always had a little bit of a psychological bent to everything I do. In the sense I guess like maybe a lawyer who's 50 can work out. I used to, even when I was a kid, I used to think like a lawyer a little bit, maybe the good ones. Not that I want to be friends with that individual, but I'd say there was always a bit of a psychological bent just to the way I think. I think, where's being one person thinking that? And so that was always in me, maybe for probably genetic reasons, God knows. But so I don't think people were surprised that I was interested in psychology because of the questions and the relationships I used to form. But I think I virtually disappeared for a while. Going off and researching and building a business, and then came back and re-entered into, say, my local environment where I was doing sport. It was quite surprising, like, oh wow, okay, so you're doing this properly. And I just think there was curiosity more than anything. I think there was probably a little bit of, they were happy that I found something I was passionate about. But what are you learning? What's coming out of all this? Because the numbers were stacking up in terms of research numbers, and so probably a bit of curiosity and a bit of desire to try and work out how because most of the people I've interacted with, they like sport, has this affect my results.
Did you, as you started to expand your research and interviewing all these top performers in all these different fields, did you focus on categories? Like, I want to zone in on this category, then with this category, or are you just open to just high performers?
But a bit of both. So, there were trips that I took, the way that we were structured was I would take research trips. So there'd be a certain amount of work where I'm communicating, and then there's a 2-week research trip. Then there's a certain amount of work, then a 2 weeks research trip. And still today, I probably, because now I'm doing a lot of travel already, I tend to do my big research blocks. So I'll do a 6-month research block.
Oh, wow.
And then I'm back at work. And because that works better because I can take my family with me. And we took a 6-month sabbatical where I think we did 100 or so interviews.
Oh, wow.
2 years ago. I took the kids with me.
That's great.
They did 50 interviews each, interestingly.
Really?
Yeah. So
that's cool.
To introduce them to the world. And so I think the way it's tended to work is you sort of do blocks of research, and that can mean you can just focus on the research itself. And some of those blocks, as I say, they're splintered with interviews from a range of different fields, just because, to make an interview line up with my diary, then their diary has to be available. and if you therefore say, okay, well, we're only going to do sports people, then it's really hard. So sometimes you'll have a bunch of people. But I have done over the years, escape from captivity. That's my brief. And so then we had people who broke out of maximum security prisons. We had people who broke out of, because I just wanted to understand how do you get really innovative when it really matters. And so I had people who broke out of, there was an organisation in Colombia called FARC, which used to capture people, hide them in the jungle. I interviewed a person who got out of that.
Wow. That's areas I would never even think.
Yeah, no.
Like, I would never even think about that.
No, well, it's high performance, right?
Yeah.
It's how do you get yourself out of a bind?
Mm-hmm.
Because what you're going to find yourself, if you go after something big enough, you're going to find yourself in a bind. So I go, okay, well, how do you get out of a bind? And so that's the next question we ask as a team in Elkiem is, who's best at getting out of a bind in the world? And that's where you land.
Interesting. People who break out of maximum security prisons.
Yeah.
That's
I would never go there. It's so fascinating that you went there. Because in my mind, I'm not thinking
high performance.
I'm not even thinking prison breaks or so what's happening in Colombia. Like, that's not. It's so fascinating that you actually went there. And that's so cool.
That's very cool.
That you were curious and actually do the research.
Yeah, and that's the way we've tended to operate. We have a wide definition of what high performance might be, because I think it is, although it's not traditional high performance. There's no world ranking in breaking out of captivity. It still is a pretty unbelievable human act to be able to accomplish. And so we define that as high performance. And then you try and stack a few up and see if you can learn something from it.
So you've worked with a lot of different people, so leaders, activists, athletes, scientists, and you've studied a lot of people, like people who break out of maximum security prisons. I'm curious about what some of your stories with these high performers are, if you have any very memorable ones.
There's sort of stories that are memorable for different reasons. I think sometimes the story or the experience is memorable because you're in a different place. Mm-hmm. One of the most impactful 10 days or 2 weeks of my life was I interviewed a bunch of the existing samurai warriors, and so I often notice when I'm occasionally in communicating, you want to make sure there's a story that's sort of entertaining and it's got because it's a flat spot or whatever, and you want to make sure that there's something in the middle of all that'll create a little bit of entertainment. I tell myself going to those Japanese samurai stories a bit, and because I just found that those guys, they had such a clear way of thinking and it's such a different experience that it can make the experiences themselves do sort of work their way into stories. And so there's a bunch of that. There's one guy called Shimazu Sensei, who every time I got distracted in the interview, he'd punch me in the face. and
imagine that, Patty.
Sorry, what?
And that doesn't happen a lot. It doesn't happen a lot in life where you lose focus and someone punches you in the face.
Yeah.
And so it's memorable for me. And so there's a bunch of those different things. And sometimes it's much more simple. The first person that ever said to me, you need to study human uniqueness, was this philosopher. He's sort of 83 years of age. He's wearing one of those sort of cravats, those sort of scarves that come over the top of the. And I remember trying to just I was trying to get to the camera and turn the camera on because he was already talking. And he said, I know what you do. I've heard about you. I said, what do I do? And he said, you study human uniqueness, don't you? And I went, interestingly, I do, but I've never actually articulated it. And so there's just little bits and pieces that for me have made a difference. And I think that the stories that I remember are the ones that have shaped me, because I've gone through this since I was 22, 23 years of age. There's been a huge part of this research that has helped me to learn.
What do you say to people that are like, well, just give me, Andy, you've been doing all this research, just give me the top line stuff. Just tell me, what does it take to be a high performer?
Talent. Just be good at something. Someone should do a friggin' TED talk on that. Get good at something. It's true. Everyone loves the stories of the overcoming and whatever, but it helps to have a bit of talent. And what I mean by talent is a pre-existing ability to do what you're about to do. If you're a basketballer, you better be tall. There's examples of ones who aren't, but you're probably better off being tall. If you're a swimmer, you're better off having large feet. And so it starts there. Then the next you say, well, have you got an interest in this thing that your body could be probably good at or your mind could be good at? And it starts off boring, doesn't it, high performance? It's like, can you do at high level based on your pre-existing gene structure, the psychological structure, are you built for this? Do you have an interest in it? And then it starts getting interesting. It starts getting, then beyond that, it starts going, righto, let's start looking at your method. Let's start looking at the sequence at which you do things. Let's start looking at your mind. So that's where you start. But I think of the stuff that we can then control, it's what is your emotional intensity about this?
So would you say those concepts are kind of mandatory, like having a pre-existing talent and then having an interest in it? Or do you think someone could still succeed without one of those?
Well, I haven't met, it depends on how you define success. I think if you're saying to me, have I ever met a person who was the best in the world who wasn't genetically made or wasn't interested in it? I go, no. But
I guess achieve high performance. Yeah.
But that's the way sort of we do. That's to an extent, unfortunately, the way we define high performance is probably best in the world or something, and so, or at least in that pocket of people. But if I then say, well, what is a good way of defining high performance for a person individually? I think what a person needs to do is to answer the question, what do you want? Because I then think once a person understands what it says, well, that's what I want. That is what high performance is for them, in my opinion. You forget about comparisons. My job is to use comparisons to go and work out who's worth interviewing, and that's we have to define it in a very narrow range. Otherwise, I'm not worth listening to as a researcher. But in terms of a personal definition of high performance, what do you want? And then we have to come upstream from that and say, okay, well, who do you need to become to be the sort of person that can create that? And I think that's the simple process that happens with high performance. In that way, there's no limit. There's no limits. Now, whether that person who says, well, I want to be the best Ironman in Australia, whether that person is actually good enough talent-wise, that will happen downstream. But let's decide what you want first. So I think there's probably a generic definition of high performance, best in the world at something. Your more personal definition is just decide what you want, and that's now high performance for you. And I think anyone then, using a better method that is well researched and well sequenced and all that stuff, can probably get better than what they are today. Notwithstanding some really bad luck or some sort of degeneration in their body or mind.
I like that. So it's what do you want and what do you believe?
Yeah, what do you want? What do you need to believe to get it? And what's your method? What is your sequence? How are you going about this? Step one, step two. I think some people believe that we've seen a bunch of stuff happen in this last year that's been pretty extraordinary. The breaking of the 2-hour marathon. There's been a bunch of stuff that's been really interesting. And I think people look back and they think, oh, thank God, that's so much like they've improvised their way there. People aren't improvising their ways to those goals. It's method. It's well thought through, first, second, third. And all we ever do in these programs is we're just working out, we're just getting the order right. Do this, then do this, then do this, then it's going to be fine. Just follow the formula. There's a formula to this. And anytime you go and interview someone, you go and interview the team of people that have been part of breaking the 2-hour marathon, you're going to find method, formula. You're going to find this is what they did first, this is what they did second, and that's what my job is in the method part of my research. What do you do first? What do you do second? And as long as we follow the order, and as long as we do it well, we'll tend to see an uptick. All other things being equal, I tend to see an uptick in what people want, which is the result.
I think what I love about your sessions, and they're fascinating because you come in and you're going to have 8 hours with Andy, right? And there's not like a PowerPoint. It's Andy talking with you, asking really, really good questions that get you thinking. And then you'll write on the board a little bit. But I found the entire 8 hours like totally engaging, totally interesting. And I'm really curious about, because you ask really good questions. And I guess that's part of being a really good researcher.
Yeah, it's also part of having the time to think about what question should I ask. I'm not up there inventing it.
Yeah, no, right.
I'm not thinking, "Geez, what question should I ask now?" I've thought about that over years, and I hope they are good questions. And I also hope people aren't bored. I'm pretty sure there's a percentage of people that are bored in that room. I think very carefully. I'm doing the best I possibly can to create the chance of a person getting a better method or a better observation or insight or belief or whatever it is that might improve their chances when it comes to high performance. And I take that role very seriously. I take it very seriously. I love it, but I feel like I've got a job to do. So I hope that is the case. But if it is, it's not by accident.
You mentioned you have 2 children. Is there any specific way you're cultivating high performance with them?
I'm not as interested in high performance with those kids as I am trying to just make them into good kids.
Right.
And I think to an extent, you sort of can't stop high performance in people. I think it tends to run on its own, and that horse bolts. And so I'm more interested in trying to give them what I perceive to be a really balanced, honourable childhood. And both of my kids, when I took them away on that sabbatical, I told them at the start of the sabbatical that their job in the 6 months is to use these interviews to develop a code. Now, code, depending on how you define it, is a set of beliefs that you want to live. And so we did all these interviews, and they would, at the end of the interview, write the interview up like I did, and then I'd say, what would that person have to believe? Do you like their beliefs? And so at the end, we were in New York actually, and I said, now is your chance. You've got 2 weeks to write your code, and they've got a little book that they all have, and that this was a number of years ago, and they've got a book of all the insights that have come out of their own sort of thinking on it, and at the back of their book is their code.
That's
how cool is that?
That's so cool.
And so that, because as far as I'm no expert in this, although one of the lines of research that I did because I just wanted to be a better dad was I went and interviewed some of the top child psychologists.
Of course you did, Andy.
I did, and so I sort of just give me the headlines. If we want healthy kids, what do we need? And there's a couple of things that came out of it, and particularly with little girls, with where I live, there's 2 problems that you like. That if you end up with problems that you may face, drugs and anorexia. You can end up with violence, but we're not in a situation where there's great risk of violence where we live. And so I'm trying to protect those kids from those 2 problems. Now, how do you protect a kid from getting into drugs or whatever, or getting into a situation like, the sort of more eating disorders or whatever online stuff? And the answer to that is a strong identity or a passion for something. Because a passion for something, they're too busy to take drugs. A strong identity, they know when to say no. So how do you build a strong identity? You have a set of beliefs that you can practice and focus on, and you decide who you want to be. So that's a code. And all we're trying to do as parents is expose them to different things so that if they find their passion, they can find their passion.
Right.
Because I can't control whether they're passionate about something. You can't go, I'll tell you what, if you don't get passionate about that, you get 6 smacks. Tomorrow you get the wooden spoon or whatever it is, the old school method of consequence. They're either going to fight it or they don't. But when it comes to their code, their identity, you can as a parent have an influence over that, like you can if like a church has an influence over a person. You know, they're offering up beliefs and asking practice these beliefs. So I just said, I've offered to them, here's a set of beliefs over a sabbatical. Do you want them? Write them down. Is this something you want? So that's my, I'm no expert on this.
I love the fact that you just dug in, like, how can I be a better dad? Going to study this.
Yeah.
And you just went all in.
Going to interview a child psychologist.
So cool. Yeah.
Very cool.
It's why, that's more driven from fear of being a shitty one. I don't know really the vision of what a good dad looks like, but I pretty much know what a shitty one looks like. And I don't want to be that one.
Yeah. Going back to your questions. So I remember coming into one of the very first sessions, the very first hours with you, and you had people raise their hands. You were asking the question around how many people have been in the company for like less than a year. And then you asked the question around who had been in the company like more than 4 or 5 years. And I remember raising my hand up. And then you called us all out saying that many of us have been institutionalized. And I remember just like getting upset and going, he's right. Like, because I was realizing, yes, there's bureaucracy that I've kind of been part of. And I also haven't pushed back on certain things that I did when I was new to the company. So immediately, just that question, that was like, to me, kind of insulting. It was like the right question because it totally resonated with me. And right when I got back, I told Patty, I'm like, I got to tell you this question that Andy said, because it was a very powerful statement about where I am at Experian and how I'm doing. Because I like to think of myself as a high performer. I'm curious. I'm trying to be innovative and gritty. But then you're right. If you've been in a company for a certain period of time, you start to accept things, and that becomes a problem.
Yeah, and I just think, if you look at the mind of anyone who hangs out with a lot of people, day in, day out, call it institutionalization, call it, conditioning, you give it a name. In corporate life, I want to be jarring for that reason. I want to call it a name that has negative connotations, institutionalization. But if you can imagine that our job in that room is to create changes in behavior. Now, what institutionalization does is it creates consistency of behavior. And so, or any other type of conditioning that takes place, it's consistency of behavior. And so if I'm to have a pattern interrupt of a person's performance, so they went on and into that room in a certain trajectory and they can come out in a different trajectory, I hopefully need to allow the person to see that maybe they've become conditioned in their method. And that's my reason for bringing that up. And it is something that I do concern for you guys in large organisations, large enterprises, that over time you don't realise what's happening to your mind. That's it, and you could do it if you're hanging in a school, or a university for any period of time. It's just a lot of people stay in companies for 10 years. We're only in uni for 4 years. So this is something to have on your mind, because you've got to, that runs on its own. And so the idea around bringing that to your mind is you can have pretty clear defences as long as you're aware that it can happen. So, there was a logic for that, and there's logic for doing it early in the piece so that you get a chance to hold a second shit. Maybe I've got to be a bit more thoughtful about what's happening here.
We are approaching our hour, so any last questions?
I think, one last question would be around your teaching. Can you talk a little bit about the types of classes you teach for organizations that are interested in bringing you on?
I probably these days I'm spending more time doing master classes than I am anything else. So masterclass format is where a smaller group, everyone chooses as an objective, a business objective they're going after, and we spend the program working out how to get to that business objective. And they're normally very, very big. I know we've just been talking about that in this room today with Brian. What are the objectives for all these individuals? And everyone's going after something pretty significant. And at the end of the program, the person who wins the program is the one who's achieved the most significant objective, as long as they've collaborated and they've been able to prove sustainability. And so I spend most of my time doing that, I would say, around the place, just because it's quite commercially focused, and I think that's where sort of value is for enterprises. You sort of want your cultural change and you want your leadership development. It'd be nice to have that sort of, hopefully happen alongside people doing their jobs, and so I think we spend most of our time, or I spend most of my time doing that these days, and other sort of tailored advice-based work, which is based on, I've got this performance problem, how would you approach that? So it's pretty much the essence of our work.
Awesome. Actually, I have, one last question, because something that I was very impressed about and I was very happy you talked about is ethics, because it's one thing to be a high performer, but you can be a jerk, right? Because you're just all focused on the goal. I will do whatever it takes, push people out of the way. Can you talk a little bit about...
Yeah, that's what everyone hates about high performance, and it's what I hate about it. I hate it when it means that someone thinks that they're going to win at all costs, the whole yellow jersey thing in cycling, or, the person who cheats to get there. Like, there's nothing about that I like. I hate it when humans start to get referred to as numbers. Humans are FTE. How many FTE have you got?
Mm-hmm.
What? Because it dehumanizes, it means that any performance sort of, means that all of a sudden humans have just become cogs in wheels. So the way I've always sort of thought about that in my own mind is that, love is clearly the most important thing in life. Clearly. Anyone who's done any thinking about life says it's about love. Then you've probably got honour, health and honour, all that stuff sitting around the place. And then down underneath that somewhere is performance. But we're not, in my work, talking about the most important thing. The person coming in talking about love, they're on the money. We're just talking about the other stuff, which is, the stuff you do with your excellence. But I just try and keep that really in perspective as much as I can.
So any parting words for our listeners, maybe a piece of advice for any emerging leaders?
Decide what you want. Till you've got that, we've got nothing to aim for. What do you want and why do you want it? There's your start point.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Level Up.
If you'd like to see a summary of today's show, you can go to the Experian blog. The short URL is just ex.pn/levelup.
If you found any of the information today helpful, please consider supporting us by hitting subscribe or leaving us a review. Thanks for dropping in and giving us a listen, and we hope to see you again for our next episode.